Welcome and good morning to everybody. I would request all the panel members to please turn on their videos and we can get started. I would welcome Preeti to give opening remarks this morning. Preeti, over to you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this panel on behalf of the UN Capital Development Fund, where I'm privileged to serve as its executive secretary. And we do this meeting today, this morning, along with our partners, the joint SDG Fund and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, showcasing our work in blended finance. So allow me to share a few comments to kick off this morning's session. Last week, in this continuing UN General Assembly timeframe, we had a rich discussion on how collaborating with a range of partners to create innovative financing solutions that can catalyze investments in SMEs in the 46 LDCs we served. Today, we will demonstrate how the same tools and principles are being used to support biodiversity and the blue economy, particularly in the small island states. Allow me to first recognize Ambassador Satyendra Prasad, Permanent Representative of Fiji to the United Nations, as well as Mrs. Evelina Wevers-Crowe, Prime Minister of Aruba and Minister of General Affairs, Integrity, Energy, Innovation, and Government Organization. I would also like to acknowledge the Honorable Ayaz Saeed Qayyum, Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Civil Service, Communications, Housing, and Community Development of Fiji, who could not be here personally, but we do have a video recording of his pre-recorded remarks. Excellencies, ministers, ambassadors, government delegations, and all other attendees joining us today, thank you so much. Your presence is very much appreciated. As I did last week, I would like to kick off with a handful of reflections in our blended finance work and UNCDF's overarching approach to mobilizing private capital for impact. Our ambition at the UN Capital Development Fund is to be a go-to resource for catalytic financing for the LDCs within the UN development system. We believe that UN agencies can combine development support with investment support to attract more public and private capital into development. Indeed, the initiative that we will hear more about today accomplishes this. Through a catalytic investment of USD 3.5 million, the joint SDG Fund and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs are helping to mobilize capital from asset owners, fund managers, and institutional investors to accelerate biodiversity and nature preservation efforts in Fiji. These types of catalytic investments allow for two important things. First, they use donor funding to protect commercial investors from financial loss and de-risk investments through technical assistance, capacity building, and the like. Second, they pay for demonstration effects, therefore allowing innovative models of financing to be tested, scaled up, and to achieve more impact. The program being discussed here today integrates some of these elements. It aims to leverage $50 million in investment capital by 2030 within the UN system, playing a mediating role between the private sector and the government to ensure that the selected projects are both impactful and investment ready. Although I mentioned this in my remarks last week as well, I would be remiss not to reiterate the important role of the joint SDG Fund process in prioritizing the agenda of the LDCs and the SIDS. As you may already know, the process was instrumental in generating proposals across the UN system for innovative and blended vehicles. 155 proposals were received, and Fiji was one of the 4 countries selected. Fiji's selection is as strong a signal as any that the joint SDG Fund endorses the goals of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which unites various UN agencies under the umbrella of SDG 14. Joining UNCDF in this effort are UNDP, UNEP, MPTF, who are all playing specialized but complementary roles in supporting the goals of the fund. We believe that this level of collaboration is a force multiplier that is needed within the UN development reform process. Much depends on our ability to engage seamlessly within, across, and outside UN agencies. Our own strategic framework 2022-2025 recognizes this fact. As I close, I would like to end as I did last time, because so much of what I said cannot be done alone. UNCDF recognizes that no single entity can resolve the complex challenges and opportunities of scaling up sustainable finance solutions, especially in the LDCs and the SIDS. For this reason, much of our efforts are focused on expanding our investment work, which has so far demonstrated that we can deploy capital and leverage it up to 6 times by crowding in other investors and local banks. This is an indication of our commitment to complementarity and additionality. The fact is that our view of and the tolerance of risk differs from many other players that support the missing middle. The collaboration with the joint SDG Fund, the Coral Reef Fund, and all the UN agencies involved in this effort is a powerful example that the missing middle, the companies that fall in that range, and that catalyze SDG investments in local economies through blended finance. With that, I would like to turn it back over now to Honorable Ayaz Said Qayyum, who will provide his introductory remarks through a video recording. So over back to the moderator for this video. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Preeti. We'll just share our screen and play the video.
Bulavinaka from Fiji. The story of our changing climate is a story of a changing ocean. As the planet's largest carbon sink, the ocean has long served as a mighty blue shield from the worst of the climate crisis. Here in our capital, Suva, looking over the vast Pacific horizon, it's easy to fall into the fantasy of thinking that protection is without end. But it is not endless. All it takes is a glimpse beneath the surface and a hard look at the science to dispel that illusion and reveal how fragile our ocean ecosystems can be. Without urgent action to drastically cut carbon emissions, we will push our ocean past a tipping point that will doom the life it supports, including humankind. Last year, 80% of the world's oceans suffered massive heat waves, threatening oceanic life at a scale never before. Massive stretches of coral reefs are bleaching, and fish populations are dying or moving away from communities that have long relied on them for food. The 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change shows that unchecked ocean emissions put us on course for an anthropogenic self-destruction by this century's end. If we continue our death march towards 2100, by maintaining or increasing current levels of emissions, the IPCC report warns that the projected rate of ocean warming could double in this century or even skyrocket up by 8 times. Marine heat waves are projected to be longer and more intense, with the Pacific seeing up to 100 days of marine heat waves annually at 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. This would double at 2 degrees Celsius of warming, reaching an average of 200 days. That impending disaster is no less of an existential threat to Pacific Islands than the rising seas. The ocean is life in Fiji. It is where we fish for food that feeds families and creates income, and it forms an intimate piece of the identity of every Fijian. When you look at our blue planet, Fiji is not a small patch of Pacific Islands. We are a large ocean state. Our 1.3 million square kilometers of ocean make us the 26th largest country by EEZ in the world, and the 6th largest country in terms of coral reef area. Our coral reefs make up an estimated 10,020 square kilometers of coral reefs, or 3.52% of the world's entire coral reef population. Fiji champions what we call the ocean climate nexus, because we see it in front of our eyes every day. The climate crisis is an oceans crisis, and that is why we seek a permanent home for oceans in the UNFCCC process through the Oceans Pathway. Poorly led nations are destroyed by a crisis. Well-governed nations survive a crisis. but truly great nations are defined by a crisis. We are in the defining hours of the ocean climate crisis. We can tell you Fiji does not intend to be destroyed. We do not intend to merely survive. We intend to turn this crisis into an opportunity to build a sustainable and prosperous blue economy. We have committed ourselves to achieve the 100% sustainable management of our ocean by 2030, with 30% of Fiji's EEZ to be designated as marine protected areas. Our Climate Change Act enshrined these development-defining commitments in law. To fund that effort, we are pioneering innovative financing mechanisms. Following the success of Fiji's Green Bond in 2017, we are working with the Government of the United Kingdom and the United Nations Capital Development Fund to issue a blue bond by the middle of 2022. We are working with our development partners on blended finance solutions that can leverage impact financing for transformative ocean conservation projects. And we are bringing the private sector on board to tap the potential of big blue opportunities. We welcome the opportunity to partner with the Global Fund for Coral Reef, or GFCR, to implement projects that will help protect Fiji's pristine marine biodiversity and create economic returns within and beyond the tourism sector. The proposed establishment of 30 marine protected areas around Fiji, the construction of an organic fertilizer factory and a sanitary landfill in Western Fiji, and the establishment of a technical assistance facility to support Fijian SMEs in the marine space are all welcome initiatives. We hope we can achieve much more together. And as Fiji continues to push the boundaries for innovative climate finance in the Pacific, we look forward to new frontiers of joint collaboration and cooperation with the joint United Nations SDG Fund. Our Prime Minister's vision is for Fiji to be a compass that points towards better, greener, and bluer societies. We are ready to be a testbed for blue innovation. We are ready to put innovative finance to work. We are ready to set Fiji towards the future we all want for ourselves. I wish you all the best with your panel discussions. We will see you in Glasgow. Vinakava Kalevu, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I would now turn over to Madam Prime Minister of Aruba for her remarks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Greetings from this very beautiful island of Aruba. We know all too well that as SITs, we are disproportionately vulnerable and that our livelihoods are threatened like no other. It has become increasingly clear how climate change is a threat multiplier and undermines our assets, our food system, our health, and the viability of economic and human advancements. We also know that we are not in a decision-making position that will eliminate the imminent impacts of this global challenge. But through respect for local knowledge, application of developmental ingenuity, wise use of technology, and ecosystem-centered cooperation, we can transform our societies and our economies to secure sustainable futures for mankind. We need to have a clarity of vision and have hope. Addressing local challenges by identifying the key levers and entry points for sustainable development will guide small island states into enhanced governance, diverse economies, and blended financial structures that will inspire local communities to participate in individual and collective action. The real change can only be made with a strong political commitment locally and globally. We need a system-wide change, and as SITs, we need to keep making our voices heard and be guided by a positive vision of what the world can look for us. And we need to do this together. Each individual, each community, each country. We need to focus on fit purpose and innovative solutions and financing to fix the daunting reality. The role of the UN providing long-term ecosystem-centered financing is crucial for the achievement of the targets described in the SDGs. This structured and collective guidance provided by the Fijian government is exactly what small island nations have called on to in the past when addressing climate change and development bottlenecks. By promoting blended financing, reef-positive adaptation is recognized as the foundation for equitable food and water systems, just and resilient economic development within a changing climate, providing communities with the tools and opportunities to thrive in harmony with nature. The case of the Government of Fiji, the Global Coral Reef Fund, and the joint partnership with the SDG Fund and the UNCDF will provide a successful example of scaling up and accelerating the conservation, sustainable use, and restoration of marine biodiversity through alignment of global objectives and local actions. It clearly aims to go beyond the scope of only reducing operational emissions, and it provides incremental steps to decouple nature impact from economic development. As a coral reef country, it is empowering transformative economic development to become sustainable, and it involves private sector through support through investment and philanthropy as key contributors. The proposed financial flow system will fortify small island nations' efforts in achieving diverse economies through application of blue economy principles. For other coral reefs nations, it is a tangible case study that can be used for in-country application. For Aruba, within the Caribbean region, it can mean securing sustainable financing to upscale our efforts that have already been undertaken to achieve resilient reef systems. We have initiated several programs in Aruba and adapt policy and legislation, including enhancing our water quality monitoring program with indicators for environmental health so it can amplify its human-centered approach, which is a basic tenet of my government. With this said, I welcome the presentation of the joint effort between the UN system and the Government of Fiji as a scalable example for the Caribbean region. We may be on opposite sides of the globe, but our commonality binds us, and it is only together, including through South-South cooperation and help of our global partners, that we can create imperative change. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. We do now have a short video, which is of some of our colleagues here today from Fiji.
Fiji has some of the most resilient reefs in the world. Under a 2-degree warming scenario, Fiji's reefs are the most likely to survive. These corals could be used to reseed reefs around the world that have died in 20 to 30 years' time. But if we don't stop the local anthropogenic threats, then these reefs will not survive. In Fiji, we have a problem. We have poor waste and pollution management. We have agricultural runoff. We have deforestation driven by agriculture. We have overfishing. We need to stop these issues if we are going to save our reefs.
These actions are causing damaging ripple effects that we are witnessing in real time that seriously threaten the survival of our coral reef systems and key marine species. My name is Natasha Morosi. I'm the Director of Conservation for Bang Adventure Divers and the Program Coordinator for My Fiji Shark. Our solution is to establish fully protected fish banks, allowing marine biodiversity to expand and to overflow.
My name is Jodie Smith and I work with Matanataki. At Matanataki, we work with private sector businesses who can bring about transformational change to the environment and to Fiji's reef systems. In Fiji, our waste has not been managed properly historically. Most of our dump sites, they sit on the coast. They sit on mangrove. We were walking on one of these dump sites earlier today, and it's basically a floating mass of waste.
That entire zone, that entire dump is actually floating in a marine ecosystem. My name is Paul Evers. I work for HG Leach, and we run the only international standards landfill in the South Pacific on Fiji. The Vulavulesara project is a visionary project to contain, manage waste away from the marine ecosystem, away from the coastal areas. Vulavulesara will enable the recycling of 80% of that waste stream to recycle and upcycle materials, and particularly plastics, so they can be repurposed within Fiji and the Pacific.
I'm Sanjeev Chand, the founder of the Fertile Factory and Company and one of the directors of Waste Clear Fiji Limited. We will be replacing imported chemical fertilizer. We will be making a natural product using what is now considered waste. So the wasted opportunities, which is all the biomass, green waste, will be turned into a product that would be a natural fertilizer. And once we unite our farmers with our natural products, the impact, the devastation that has been caused by chemical runoffs from these fertilizers over decades on our reef system, slowly but surely, we will turn that around.
We're able to bring government, the private sector, the general public, the communities, we can all come together. And of course, the donors and the investors, we can all come together to solve the problem. I think this is something in the past that has been missing. Multiple stakeholders, innovative blended financing, and local solutions. We haven't had this bigger picture approach, and this is what this program is providing.
We will now turn over to Lisa for her moderation of the panel. Over to you, Lisa.
Very good. Thank you, Abhishek. Honorable guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to this UN General Assembly side event, Blended Finance in Action, the Road to Doha on SDG Finance and LDCs, with a focus on blue economy and Fiji's coral reef. My name is Lisa Kerbiel. I'm head of the Secretariat of the Joint SDG Fund. I am delighted to moderate today's panel with a really star-studded group of speakers and guests. And that video, I think, really brings it home to many of us how important this conversation is today. Our guests today include Ambassador His Excellency Dr. Satyendra Prasad, Permanent Representative of Fiji to the United Nations, Ms. Penny Stock from the UN Development Program, who is the lead of the Coral Reef Conservation and Global Fund Coral Reef Focal Point, Mr. Anders Berlin, who's Director of the LDC Investment Platform at the UN Capital Development Fund, Ms. Jody Smith, we just saw in the video, who's partner in Matanataki, Mr. Sanjeev Chand, CEO and founder of the Fertile Factory and Company, Mr. Terry Tamminen, Operating Advisor, Pegasus Capital Advisor, Mr. Oliver Wendon, Vice President and Chief Executive Officer of the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and Mr. James Smith, Deputy Director, Marine Environment of the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs of the United Kingdom. As you can see, it's a star-studded panel. It's a large panel, so I won't waste any more time. I'll get right into it. I'd like to begin with His Excellency Ambassador Prasad, again, our ambassador of Fiji to the United Nations here in New York. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us bright and early today. Our first question to you is really about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the reality that Fiji is reopening by the end of this year, so just in a few months. And could you please share with us what are some of the lessons that have been learned from the crisis, and what are Fiji's plans in terms of taking advantage of its magnificent natural resources, of course, its beautiful coral reefs and its marine and coastal ecosystems? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and to all the panelists, Honorable Prime Minister and Executive Secretary. Good morning to all of you, and good evening to folks in Fiji and elsewhere. Thank you very much for inviting me and for presenting this panel and this discussion on the margins of UNGA. I think that's also significant in itself. because one of the big messages of General Assembly is that for SDGs, the volume of resources that are available to achieve the SDGs are simply not available in the development financing as we know it. And so the world as a whole needs to be looking much more innovatively and creatively at private sector financing. So that's very important that you're having this discussion. In response to your question, Fiji is one of the most severely impacted countries in the world by COVID crisis, and that's a measure of the extent to which tourism is, and the blue economy around tourism is part of the Fijian economy. That has been in shutdown mode for 14-15 months now. There's been virtually zero tourists and close to minus 18% economic decline. So it demonstrates how dependent countries like ours are on the blue economy, and what happens when a big shock as COVID happens. Fiji is likely to open in slightly more than a month. The way in which Fiji is thinking is that the approach to blue economy and the approach to tourism has to be very, very different from the way in which it was structured before. Build back better and build back bluer and build back greener are essential part of our thinking. That tourism should begin to look less like an extractive industry and more as a contributing to global goals and sustainability, sustainable management of oceans, and that the service, environmental and ecological service provides are given a lot more value in the way in which we repurpose the tourism industry and our recovery. And the Honorable Minister has given you some signature lines about that Fiji's 100% approach to 100% management of its entire 2.3 million square kilometers of oceans by 2030, 30% marine protected area. Fiji has already declared a moratorium on deep sea bed mining and the other aspects have been brought to you quite sharply. So it's a very imaginative, bold, and comprehensive approach to building sustainability. And this discussion is very useful in how we fund essential parts of that build back bluer and build back greener.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think there's no doubt that Fiji will be setting an example for many of the small island developing states where tourism is such a critical piece of the economy. And I love your analogy to the extractives. I think that's a very important part for all the travelers out there to keep in mind when they go to visit beautiful islands like yours. You know, part of, and the minister's speech was so powerful in really outlining some of the steps taken by government. This project and this collaboration really does showcase partnerships. It's 3 UN agencies, right? The Capital Development Fund, the UN Development Program, the UN Environmental Program. As was pointed out in the video, private entrepreneurs, private investors, civil society. Have you seen this mix of players to be the right one? Is anybody missing? What do you think it tells all of everyone tuning in about the new way of building back better?
So thanks very much. I think 2 things have come together. One, the Secretary General's effort for a one UN and a joined up UN. This is at show. This is at display in its finest. And I really want to congratulate UNCDF, UNDP, UNEP, and Lisa, the SDG Fund. People may have lost the detail that the trigger for this very substantial private sector financed and philanthropy financed approach to sustainability and blue economy in Fiji was the SDG Fund, which provided the initial financing. So there are 2 parts of it. One is the ability of the UN to come together in a joined up way and bringing the comparative advantages of different agencies such as UNCDF and UNDP and UNEP and of course SDG Fund in that cohesive with coherence apply to a very practical outcome. So I want to congratulate the UN as a system and the RC's office in providing the coordination effort. On the other end, the things that we are talking about, that we have to catalyze private sector investment, that we have to leverage the grant financing that is available for larger private sector investment that is needed for the scale of the problems, as the video has shown. These are very significant, multi-million dollar type of investments. And so you brought the pieces together in a creative and innovative way to be able to catalyze the level of funding that is needed to get us over the line. So fantastic partnership between Fiji government and a joined up UN system. Fantastic, I'd say, quantum leap on the UN as a system in being able to leverage and catalyze private sector financing, and for all the groups that you will be hearing about of them being able to come together in a focused and targeted way. And my only plea and urge would be that the initial funding, such as the SDG Fund, that allowed the initial trigger, that these are well resourced, and that the pipeline of financing available to it is continued, so other countries can benefit from that, and that the grant components that is financing the leveraging of private sector financing, such as that coming from GCF, are well resourced, and that the OECD especially increases the level